Hi everyone, I'm Tim and I'd like to welcome you to the second of the Next Action Associates GTD masterclasses of this round. Today we're going to talk about management and about how getting things done can support you as a manager, particularly if you're a new manager. And I wanted to do this topic because this is how I discovered GTD. I was a software developer. I was a technical operator and then a software developer, and the pace of that work kind of suited me. I would be given a job to do, I would do it, I would give it back, I'd be given another piece of work to do. And then I became a manager. I was promoted to be a manager because I was good at that job. And I was rubbish at it. I was completely unprepared for the new commitments, the new expectations, the fact that I wouldn't just have my own work to do, but I'd be having to think about my team's work, but also what my client needed. And I was all at sea. I wasn't making very good decisions. I was very stressed at work. I was being really grotty and cross. I was being horrible to my girlfriend. And that was when I discovered GTD. I nearly messed up a couple of quite big things and realised that I needed to sort it out, getting things done. And the rest is history, and it's remained with me ever since. And I've told that story so many times that people have responded to it. They recognise themselves in it, or it feels familiar to them. And I thought, actually, it would be useful to maybe do a bit more of a deep dive into what it was about GTD that helped, and on reflection over time, why it is that we find that transition from doing to management so difficult. So, my observation around the difficulty of switching between doing, if you like, and management is really spreads across two things. One is that it is tempting to try and continue doing your old job, doing your work, and treating management as kind of a bolt onto it. It's just like an extra task you have to do. And if you do that, if that's the approach you take, you're kind of on a bit of a hiding to nothing, because you won't give yourself the time and space you need to do the management thing right. And the stress that causes will then impact on the rest of your work. And then the other thing I think that people are very slow to get used to, they find difficult to adapt to, and something that I really struggled to adapt to start with, are the things that you can take advantage of from being a manager. The things that can work to your advantage from being a manager that can help with becoming a better manager. And all of this really revolves around making space to manage. Make space to be a manager. And that sounds really simple. Yes, why don't we just do that? But it's something you have to actively do. Yes, you have a workload, and then you have line reports, and you have a team, and you have the different responsibilities of being a manager, but you need to embrace those in order to be able to address them. And you also have to be on top of your own work. You're not going to be able to do your team justice if you're struggling to keep your head above water. So I'd like to talk about two things that I found super helpful when I first started doing GTD, and have continued to lean on in order to enable myself to be a person who has space to manage. And the first one of those is capture. So capture is the first of the 5 phases of managing workflow. And it is possibly the thing that I found, and a lot of people find, gives the most immediate impact. Because if you come to GTD, you're generally carrying things around in your head. Most people are carrying a lot of stuff around in their head. And the minute that you start developing a capture habit of writing down the things that have your attention so that you can think about them in more detail later rather when you're trying to do something else, it's an incredibly freeing, incredibly liberating feeling. It's like a weight being lifted off your shoulder. And we've all had that experience where we sit down and write a list because things are just getting too much for us. So developing a capture habit is massively important for feeling like you're on top of your own work. But it's also great to enable you to make space to manage. So let me give you an example. Say you are working on a proposal. You're banging through a big proposal that has to be out by the end of the day, and you are just getting to the pricing bit, which is the bit where you've really got to focus. And you kind of know what you're going to say, but you've not done it yet. And then one of your team comes up and says, can I have a minute? Now, at that moment, you've got a choice to make. Do you say, no, I don't have a moment, I've got to do this thing? Or you can interrupt what you're doing and give them that moment that they need. Whichever way you do it, and there's no right or wrong way you need to find out whether is it important, can it wait, so on and so forth. But whichever way you go, capturing that moment will really, really help you make sure that you follow through on both of those commitments. So if actually that moment that they need doesn't have to be right now and you can catch them a bit later on, capturing the fact you need to do it before the end of the day is really helpful in making sure you do. If actually it is urgent and you do need to talk to them straight away, capturing where you're at in your work as you put it down, what were you about to work on. If you're in the middle of writing an email, I sometimes write down what the next sentence I was going to write was, just so that I've got this is where I'm at, line in the sand, and it makes it easier to pick it up later. So capture, really, really helpful in giving you the mental space to manage. But in order to embrace the new responsibilities in management, you kind of have to understand what they are. You have to recognize what you've committed to. And for this, we turn to something in getting things done called the horizons of focus. Specifically, what we call Horizon 2, which is the areas of focus and responsibility. Now, the areas of focus and responsibility aren't things that you complete. They're not things that you do. They're kind of about who you are, what has your focus, what you have responsibility for. And we all have multiple areas of responsibility and focus in our lives. But if you've moved from being a doer to a manager, or from being a manager of an individual to being a manager of a team, you've got more areas of responsibility and focus than you realised before. So the way I think about it is that I have an area of responsibility for each one of my line reports, plus an area of responsibility for a team. Now, brainstorming all that out is a brilliant way of getting to grips with all the things in your life that are important to you and all the things in your life that need your attention. So sit down with a big piece of paper and draw or brainstorm or mind map, whatever works for you, all the places of your life that need action from you or need attention from you, at work and at home. Because once you've got those down, it gives you a point of reference to say, am I giving these things the attention they deserve? Do I have balance? So it could be, actually, by doing that, once you've got this list, you realise you have been concentrating on some of your individual line reports, but actually maybe the team as a whole hasn't had the attention from you that it would need, and maybe you need to do something about that going forward. Maybe it's that actually you've been spending so much time focusing on the team that there's a couple of projects that you've committed to personally which are now creeping up, and you need to maybe just redivert some energy towards those. So identifying your horizons of your areas of focus and responsibility, Horizon 2 in the Horizons of Focus, can just give you a really good checklist to make sure that what you are working on is spread in a balanced way across everything you're responsible for. So making space to manage, that's all about recognizing that being a manager is not just having an extra thing on your task list on top of your normal work. You're now doing a different role. But with that different role comes some perks. With that different role come a few things that you can start to do in order to not only make your life slightly easier, but also to develop and broaden your people. And the first one of those is delegation. I would go as far as say everybody can probably delegate a little bit more or a little bit more effectively. All managers at some point run into a problem with delegation, whether that's just that they don't know how to do it, they're uncomfortable doing it, they haven't really understood what successfully delegating something means, or actually they delegate but in a way that never really gets them the outcomes that they need. Delegation isn't just about forwarding an email and saying, can you take care of this? Actually, it can be sometimes, but for the most part, it's more complicated than that. And the GTD tool that is most useful, without a doubt, for delegation, and it seems so absurdly simple when you think about it, is the waiting for list. The waiting for list is a list of things that you've asked people to do for you, or things that you're waiting on other people for. And without that list, when you delegate something, you're kind of leaving it up to chance as to whether that thing's going to happen and whether you're going to follow up on it. And frankly, if you delegate something and then never ask about it ever again and it doesn't happen, you've set an expectation that you delegating something doesn't really matter. So the waiting for list is a great way of saying, I have asked for this from this person and I need it by this time. Personally, I like to go through my waiting for list on a Monday, look at anything that's due that week, and then just do a bit of chasing. Are we still okay for this week? Is this on track? As you get more sophisticated in the delegation process, you might not want to delegate tasks, you might want to delegate outcomes. And that's great because you're giving your people the autonomy and the space to be able to really approach that from a grown-up point of view, to do things the way they think is the right thing to do them. But you do need to be a bit careful that when you're delegating a project, you share an aligned vision of what that outcome looks like. And this is where the next GTD tool for delegation that I found incredibly, incredibly useful and has never let me down from a point of view of delegating larger outcomes is the natural planning model. I did a video about the natural planning model a few weeks ago. I'm not going to go through it all here, but I would like to talk about the top two layers of the natural planning model, which are purpose and vision. So when you delegate a large chunk of work and you delegate the outcome, what you're delegating is the purpose. Delegate the purpose to your person. Say, we need to do this thing because this is what's going to be different when we do this project. And here's the rules of the game. This is how much money we've got to spend. These are the basic expectations. And then get them to go away and come up with the vision. Now, the vision is an articulation of what wild success looks like. Ask them to go away and come back to you with a paragraph of what will this look like when it's been done really, really well. Because then you can go through that. And if it's in line with what you imagine, that's great. But it's a really good opportunity to see where there are differences between what you've got in your head and what they've got in their head. And it saves a whole bunch of work with them going away and getting really excited and doing an amazing job and them coming back to you and you going, it's not really what I had in mind. So to improve delegation, waiting for list, and when you start to feel confident in delegating outcomes rather than tasks, then use the natural planning model to align with your people on what is expected and to make sure that you have the same vision for what they're delivering. The other area that I think people struggle with a lot when they move into management is meetings. When you're a doer, generally people tend to think of those meetings as interruptions. Meetings are things that get in the way of you doing your work. But when you become a manager, meetings are kind of your job now. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to mean big meetings with, 8 or 9 different people and donuts. It could do, but also it means individual catch-ups, team meetings, performance reviews. As soon as you're a manager, your time immediately becomes more spoken for because there are people who need your time, and your calendar will become busier. They say, I don't know how robust this is, but as a general rule of thumb, 10% of your time per line report for this kind of stuff. So you will have more meetings. So how do you make sure you're getting the most out of those meetings? First of all, I would suggest keeping agenda lists. Agenda lists for all your people, agenda lists for all the groups that you work with regularly. It's a really good way of making sure that even if an agenda isn't sent out for the meeting, and let's face it, quite often an agenda is not sent out for the meeting, you have a list of things that you need to get out of a meeting with that group. So you can capture something and then say, right, that is something that I need to take to this meeting, this group, put it in your agenda list. You can then circulate your agenda list before the meeting in lieu of somebody else not sending an agenda if it's their job. But it enables you to take a little bit of control of that meeting and to make sure that it's useful for you. Also, agenda lists for catch-ups are super helpful, and it reduces the amount of need to interrupt people when you're working with them for something that actually could wait until your next catch-up. Generally, as a good basis for a well-run management catch-up, agenda list, waiting for list will never see you wrong. And it means that you know what information you have to ask for or give, and it means there's then more space in that catch-up for the individual to say what they need. The other getting things done concept that is really, really important to get into people's minds for successful meetings is the idea of the desired outcome and the next action. And it's really very simple. At the beginning of the meeting, just check what the desired outcome is. In fact, maybe even before that, if you're invited to a meeting and you're not quite sure whether you need to be there or not, ask what the desired outcome of the meeting is. If somebody can't articulate that, you have got to sort of question what the meeting is for. Once you've got the desired outcome, you can use that to focus the meeting. So if it starts to go off on a bit of a tangent, saying, this is all great, but we are here for half an hour in order to get this outcome, can we get back on topic? And it means it's a less combative or provocative way of doing that, because you've all agreed what the outcome is you're trying to get to. And then when you get to the end of the meeting, ask what the next actions are. Ask who's got the next actions. Just check that you've not got any next actions if you don't think you have. What are the next actions that we are going to take as individuals when we leave this meeting? It doesn't happen often enough. You'll have a half-hour meeting and you'll leave and nobody will take any actions, which means you then just end up having to have that meeting again. So state the desired outcome of the meeting at the start and then check in on next actions at the end, just to make sure that that meeting is as valuable as it possibly can be. Because you're going to have more meetings now you're a manager. So let's make them work. So overall, when I think about my transition into management, the way that Getting Things Done supported me, it gave me space to be a manager. Partly by helping me get on top of my own work, partly by enabling me to get some of the things off my mind that were leading me to be stressed and grouchy, which meant I wasn't able to give as much of myself to my people as I would have liked, and also really enabled me to embrace what that new role looked like by recognising my new areas of responsibility. Once I got my head around that, I was able to start thinking about how I could delegate more effectively and how I could use some of the GTD tools to have more effective meetings. So waiting for lists, thinking about the natural planning model in order to align with my people, and then outcomes and next actions. So that's me. I hope that's been helpful, and I hope it's given a little bit of an insight into how Getting Things Done can really support you as a new manager. But also, if you're not a new manager, but there are just things that you wish you could do better, Getting Things Done has tools that can help.